Great, so now let's talk about the different data types that you can work with in Python. Data types are just a way to describe the different types of values that you can store in a variable and that you can use in your Python programs. So let's define a variable called myVariable, and let's assign the value Python within quotation marks. In Python we have a function that we can use. A function is like a command that executes a particular functionality that you need. For example, type gives you the data type of a particular variable or value. After we find the type, we have to print it. So we write print and we surround type with parentheses. Okay, you can see that matching parentheses are displayed in the same color. Great, so let's run our file, and now we can see that the type of that value is str. That is an abbreviation for string. Strings are used in Python to represent usually text or something that we want to treat as text, where that value is made by several individual characters that you can access individually or in slices. We will talk a lot more about strings in a coming part of the course, but I just want you to know that we have a particular data type to represent text. Great, so now let's write the value 7. What data type is the value 7? This value is an integer. In Python, the class int gives us that particular data type, integer. We use that to represent integers, including positive integers, negative integers, and the value 0. We can see that the negative integer is also an integer, and 0 is an integer too. Great! Now, if we write a decimal number with a dot, like 5.6, that changes the data type of the value. In this case, that would be a float. Float is a very peculiar way in programming of referring to a decimal number, because the point is not actually represented like this in memory. That is beyond the scope of the course, but if you would like to research more about floats and why they are called floats, that is a very interesting reading. Great, so then we find the value true. True and false. Let's check the data type of these truth values. The data type is bool. Why? Because these values are also referred to as booleans. Like this, booleans. Logic relies on these truth values, true and false. In Python, to write true and false, we need to write them with an uppercase letter. Else, if we write them in lowercase, we will see an error, because Python will not detect that we are trying to use those truth values. It will try to find a variable that is not defined. So with an uppercase letter and false here too, with an uppercase letter, and if we write it in lowercase, we will see an error. We saw booleans, we saw strings, integers, and floats. So now let's see another very helpful data type in Python, which is a data type, and it's also a data structure because it can store multiple values, a list. We will talk a lot more about these individual data types during the course. I just want you to know that they exist. If we use square brackets and we separate different elements with a comma and a space after the comma, we will get a list. Let's check that this is a list in Python. We see class list. Lists are very helpful in Python because they can be updated and they help us to store multiple elements in the same variable. They can be of different data types if you need to. If we change those square brackets with parentheses, then the data type is changed. Now we have a tuple. The difference between lists and tuples is that tuples can't be modified. So if we want to change this 2 with another value or another element, then we will get an error. So tuples are kind of safer in that way. You will not have any unexpected changes if you use a tuple and you want to keep those values fixed. We also have another data structure which is not so commonly used, but it's really nice to know that it exists, and that is called a set if we use curly braces around the elements. You can see that it's called a set. This data structure lets you store multiple values, but those values are not in any specific order. And it doesn't store any repeated elements. So if we write 2233, what we will store in memory will actually be this. It will remove any duplicate elements from the set. So sets are actually super helpful to remove duplicates from any list or tuple. And finally, we have the special value none. This is a particular value that will be very important when you start writing more complex programs. It basically represents the absence of a value. When the variable doesn't have a value yet, you can assign the value none in particular situations. And this is a value of the type none-type. And last but not least, because it is super helpful, we have dictionaries. Let's say that I want to match two values. For example, Python in my program has to be associated to a particular value 10, and JavaScript is associated to the value 9. Like in Scrabble, different letters have different values for their final score. So that association, like in a dictionary we associate words with their definitions, can be achieved using a dictionary. In a dictionary we have curly braces, we have pairs of elements, and we can access the values through keys. You will learn more about dictionaries during the course, but let's check that this is actually a dictionary. It is, because right here we see class dict. Great! So now you have a general overview of these data types. So let's continue with the next part of the course. In the next part of the course, we will talk more about strings and how you can use them. So let's continue.